Alright, we're back. Welcome back to the Q&A series. For those of you that are new here, you can ask questions for the Q&A series by sending me a message here on Patreon that is clearly a question of some sort. I should really say that at the beginning. Ah, it's the wrong type of wolf. I really should say that at the beginning more often so that people know how this show works if they're among the new ones. Wait, can I have both types of wolves at the same time? I didn't realize that.
Not in town.
I didn't realize that. What is this voodoo? I have normal wolves and dire wolves. I assume the normal wolves are way worse though, right? 156 health. How much health does dire wolf have? It doesn't say. Oh, 250. There it is. I missed that. Yeah, it's like twice the health. 2 to 6 damage versus 16 to 30 damage. Yeah, it's a huge gap. They're kind of like, I'd imagine they're like not worth summoning or something. Anyway, there's my summon. Alright, so today's first question is from Rahenna Orla. Would you be willing to talk about your thoughts of the possibility of moving and what places you're considering, if that's too personal? Maybe something about your top 3 games when you were a kid that you and what you think of them now that you're older. I'm just gonna go somewhere. I actually don't know my way around this act at all, so I'm just gonna keep running around. As far as moving goes, it's perhaps a little redundant at this point because I think I've already covered the topic a fair bit in the past. Either here or on other videos and stuff like that. Just the idea that the goal is more or less to try to get me and Wander and Bird all vaguely in the same area, which mostly just sums up to the two of us trying to move towards Bird, because Bird is rather affixed into a permanent location. Also, he lives somewhere for his job, whereas Wander and I both can kind of pick where we live. It's one of the best advantages provided by our entire the entirety of the way that we make our living, is that we can kind of live wherever to some extent. And to some extent, the smart thing would be to try to move to the cheapest place we can find that has good internet, basically. But there's quality of life questions and stuff like that. Like, should you try to move somewhere where you'll be comfortable and happy, and also near people that you know, so that you're once again happier, and so on. And that's where we're generally leaning toward. We don't have concrete plans yet. I think one of the current things is just kind of a little bit of waiting out Wander's lease, and also a little bit of saving up money for the move, and also making sure that the recent enthusiasm for Patreon doesn't just fleet after a few months and go away, because that would really be not good news if that changed. But there's not a lot to share in specifics. As far as top games I play from when I was a kid and what I think of them when I'm older, some of the things that have been on my to-do list have been just in some of the weird games. I shy away from the word. I shy away from the concept of like top and stuff like that, because it puts too much weight behind stuff, when really I'm just going to talk about some games that I just think of and stuff. One of the ones that comes to mind of revisiting a game that I liked as a kid is Star Wars Episode 1 Jedi Power Battles, which came at a height of me enjoying Star Wars and enjoying stuff. Because when I was 9 years old, The Phantom Menace was a real cool movie. Was a real big fan of that one when I was, you know, 9. I played multiple games, like the Pod Racer game, and that really awkward third-person game with the turning camera that was just called The Phantom Menace. Super Bombad Racing, which was like a Mario Kart clone thing with combat racing. Definitely had nothing, did not hold a candle to the pod racing game that people still fondly remember. And among all this crowd was Jedi Power Battles, and oh my god, Jedi Power Battles is a nightmare to play nowadays. I had an experience where I tried to sit down with Max and my brother to like play it for a little while, and I also tried to record it at one point with Andrew. We put that up on our original channel. I think the video got blocked because we left the text crawl in, so I think it eventually got blocked because I had the Star Wars theme in it and stuff like that, or something like that. It is ungodly hard and clunky and awkward, and it's still kind of satisfying to like fight some droids and deflect blaster bolts back at their sources and pull off cool tricks and stuff like that. But man, in that game, you What probably the biggest rough thing is that just the platforming and movement are super stilted and awkward and have not aged at all well. And the game has a number of platforming sections that have instant death in them. And I think as a kid, it was probably like the one game I had for a chunk of time. Because when you're a kid, a lot of time when you're playing video games, you have like your one game for a while. And so it's like, oh, this is our game. And you don't really think about like whether it's good or not. You just experience it regardless. And so I got sucked into that game back then, and it was co-op, so I could play with my brother, which was a big deal because not co-op games were more frictional to play in that setting where you're having to share the space with a sibling. Ooh, a set amulet. Yeah. So I think there's a little bit of Stockholm, a little bit of just being trapped with the game. So you just, when you're a kid, I think you learn to appreciate games because you're stuck with them. And not being stuck with the game, it's real hard to get myself to play it. One of these days I still might force myself to play through it as like a challenge run, of just like trying to get myself to get through it, or like have a friend suffer through it with me. Given infinite time with Andrew, I probably would have tried to get him and me to go through the whole thing Cuphead style and really just suffer through it, because it's an experience. I really got a kick out of doing that with Cuphead and Perfect Dark in particular, which it was just playing through those very, very difficult things with a co-op friend and just having to experience it and just like, no, we're taking it for granted that we're going to beat this, so it's not a question of how. I mean if, it's just a question of when. How many weeks will this take us? Jedi Power Battles is kind of like that. Its combat can be difficult, just because there's a lot of enemies shooting you all the time and you're not the most durable character ever, but it really, a lot of it comes down to just absolutely insane platforming in a game that's not really that well made for it. And it really culminates, and they hit you in the face with it quickly. Like right at the beginning of the game, you're going on conveyor belts where you have to somehow master your bizarre jump in order to clear gaps that will instantly kill you, and you have a limited number of lives before you have to start the entire level over. And it's co-op, and it's shared, and it's like 360p or a 480p 4x3 screen where you're running sideways and you're sharing a screen in co-op, and it's like brutal to share that screen with each other at times. And it was one of those moments where I was just like, how did we ever play this as kids? This is incredible. We're being destroyed. It was mind-blowing. That's one of the ones I have revisited. One that I revisited that wasn't surprising is I went back to Silent Bomber, which is a very nostalgic game for me. Because I don't know, I didn't play any of the popular games when I was a kid. I didn't play Zelda or Mario. I did play Mario 64, I had that. Because if you bought a 64 at launch, everyone kind of just had Mario 64 and GoldenEye. But a lot of the other games, you did not. There was less consensus, so I just would bounce around randomly and play weird things. Like sometimes I would play a Conker's Bad Fur Day, or a Rogue Squadron, or a Banjo-Kazooie, but I was just as likely to play like Mischief Makers or odd games like Silent Bomber, which is a game I've never heard anyone mention ever. I've never seen a video about Silent Bomber. I've never heard anyone bring up Silent Bomber in a conversation. It's just this unique little chunk of my memory that seems to have only existed in my life. Like that one time I played a 2.5D 4-player Street Fighter game, which I've never heard anyone mention before. There's a Street Fighter game that has 4-player multiplayer where you all share a screen on one 2-dimensional plane, and it's like, it can be like 2-on-2 or free-for-all or whatever, and it looks like a Mortal Kombat, like more recent Mortal Kombat's a little bit, where it's like 3D graphics on a 2-dimensional plane, like it's 2.5D. And this was like on the PS2 when that was not normal at all for Street Fighter. I don't think Street Fighter in the main series went 3D until 4, and this was like probably 10-15 years before that. It was just bizarre, and I never heard anyone mention that game existing either. I don't know, weird private childhoods. I didn't talk about video games with friends that much, I had a few friends where we'd end up playing stuff like Diablo 2, as we are right now. Like, this game will always be a nostalgic thing that I shared with my friends, because it was like more of a collective thing. But in my early years, it was really just me playing weird random shit that I found. Like, sometimes my parents would take me to the store, and we'd go pick out a thing, and it really was like a combination of just like box art, or maybe I heard about it in a... And maybe I'd heard about it getting good reviews in Game Pro. That's usually the one I liked more than Game Informer, because it had the stupid screaming warhead faces that would tell you the scores of the games. And I'd pick up stuff. I would end up picking up stuff like The Bouncer and Silent Bomber and weird things like that. Silent Bomber, I did a stream of it once. I was doing a New Year's stream early on in my channel, like when I had 1,000 subscribers or less. And during that stream, I did some Silent Bomber, and I did some Don't Starve, and a few other things. And then I eventually settled in to play Lone Survivor, which is this vaguely Silent Hill-like 2D game. And I beat the entire game in that night. I just committed to it, and then edited that into a Let's Play afterwards. But when I went back to Silent Bomber for that purpose, and to test out my new recording stuff that I had for my PS2 stuff a while back, and a few other things that happened, whenever I go back to it, I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what I remember. It's just a really odd game, but it's not really, like... It didn't age weirdly that much. The main issue I have with Silent Bomber... First, I should tell you what it is, I guess. Silent Bomber is a... It's basically, anime Bomberman. Basically. Like, what if Bomberman was made by Square Enix is not an inaccurate description, really. You play as some brooding, kind of insufferable, white-haired protagonist man that's got a weird fin-like things on his arms that are all mechanical, and those things are his bombing stuff, which is that you straight up you plant bombs and detonate them. That's the core gameplay of the game, much like in a little like Bomberman, except unlike Bomberman, you manually detonate all of your bombs. You have a specific loop of I think you start the game with, oh my god, that's probably an important item. You start the game with only 3 items in your inventory, 3 bombs, and so you plant the 3 and then you detonate those 3. Like, you cannot. I think planting and detonating are 2 different buttons, but you can't go past your cap of how many bombs you can have active on the map at once. So you kind of go into a loop of planting 3 bombs, detonating 3 bombs. You can tap the button to drop the bomb at your feet, and you can even tap it multiple times to drop multiple bombs, at which point it's like a little triangle with a 1 on it is the bomb, like a hologram. And if you plant multiple bombs in the same location, the number itself changes to 2, as opposed to duplicating the image. Or if you're running in a straight line and planting them while you run, then you'll just have 3 separate 1s that are all in a line. That's what happens if you tap the planting button. If you hold the bomb button, you put out a weird cone in front of your face. That's your targeting reticle. And if when you release the holding of that button, then your bomb projects outwards. It'll either travel in a straight line until it hits a wall, and then it'll be attached. Actually, no. I think it might just. Yeah, I think it might hit ground at your maximum range. It might not hit a wall, but it'll shoot out and attach to something, or you can lock onto enemies and attach bombs to them before you detonate them. And over time, you unlock more bomb types, and I think you get currencies that let you purchase upgrades that let you increase the detonation size of your bombs, or the number of bombs you have in your stock at once, meaning you can then do 4 bombs or 5 bombs before having to detonate them, and so on. A really bullshit, nonsensical anime-ass story is happening with super cheesy late 90s, early 2000s PlayStation 1 voice acting. It's doofy as all hell, and you play out this dumb story with what's really kind of engaging combat, because you're kind of puzzle fighting people, because you're fighting people with this really strange indirect form of combat that's really strange. It reminds me of the idea of like having to play. It's almost like if you're being required to play BioShock without guns, in a way. Like having to only use plasmids and indirect combat stuff, like, oh, I gotta shock that puddle, or I've gotta lay traps for people. Like, having that be your core gameplay is kind of what it is, which is where it is obviously very similar in a lot of ways to Bomberman, because Bomberman is very much that. Speaking of which, I wouldn't mind trying out, as a kid I played Bomberman 64, and I remember liking that. I wonder if I'd like that at all nowadays. I don't know. Curiosities. But yeah, just a dumb anime-ass thing happens. I never beat the game, which is another reason why I'd want to revisit it one day. There's a boss fight where the boss is a chessboard, so you're fighting an entire chess set at once. So, and all of them, if I remember correctly, all the pieces are moving vaguely like how they're supposed to move if they were real chess pieces. It's like all the pawns and the knights and everything. But I think as you whittle down the crew I think as you whittle down all the enemies, the last ones, like the king and queen, I think they start getting really, like, anime bullshit. And I think they might even get a little bit, like, it might even turn into, like, a little bit of a bullet hell or something. I don't know. I don't remember it very well. All I remember is I could not handle it as a kid. I made it to that point, and that was the hard stop for both my brother and me. Yeah, that was an experience. Other games, I mentioned Perfect Dark before, which is, to this day, is, like, it's one of my favorite games ever. I've just ever made. I won't say that in modern terms it's necessarily the best game. Like, it's got so many problems with its outdated ass aiming and really iffy gunplay. But God, I want a sequel, like a real modern sequel that's really true to what that game was, because I liked its doofy world and characters and tone and strangeness, but above all, I just really like the mission structure that has gone away. Nowadays, if you want mission structures like that, you kind of have to play like weird... Sometimes an 0451 game might get in the territory, like an immersive sim might go towards that a little bit, and sometimes you might get a stealth game that's a little comparable, but just nice shooters like that aren't so common. Just really difficult enemies, quick, like constant threat of death, but most importantly, like complicated, weird intel gathering missions. Missions where you're sent into a map and you have problems you have to solve, and you need just solve what the thing is, figure out how to solve the situation, explore this big non-linear map where there's a bunch of different things you can use to open various keys, open various doors here and there, and your objective might be to photograph something or to send a drone in a hole while hopefully not getting attacked in the process, or like knock out guards or interrogate people. And they even went to the length of having each mission have 4 difficulty levels, where every difficulty level had different objectives. Because like the easy mode run of each level of GoldenEye or Perfect Dark was that you would just blaze through the level real quick. All you had to do was run in, kill everybody, get to the end of the level, and escape. And I remember as a little kid, I would get tripped up really hard for like the 1 or 2 times per campaign that an easy mode level demanded more of that, because you were so used to not having any demands. But then once you get up to the higher difficulties, the games just go crazy, and you're expected to figure out all this crazy stuff. And I feel like, really importantly, Perfect Dark has co-op, which really adds to it, because just getting kicked in the face in GoldenEye is a lone experience, and you just have to start over and just go through it again. But the shared experience of shit, I finally died. Is that my first death? Kind of thought that might happen. Oh fuck. When you die, all of your stuff drops on the ground. I don't remember that. That's scary. That's scary. It's just some things. But in Perfect Dark, there's a specific experience of being in it with somebody else that I find really appealing, where you're trying to solve these big complicated missions with difficult enemies, and you have to do it in one run. You have to survive the entire mission and pull everything off without a hitch, and it's just really enjoyable and satisfying, and being in it in a more camaraderie setting where somebody else has to go through it with you is really welcome. And nowadays when you play like a Halo, which is my favorite of the modern ones, or a Call of Duty or most other games, even if they do have a campaign or co-op or so on, the campaign is generally just a matter of, you know, shoot all the guys, get to the end level. If any objectives are going to happen, it's going to be in a more of a modern Half-Life kind of way, which is that in Half-Life, sure, there were objectives technically sometimes, but you're really just being thrown into a series of hallways, and the scenario would happen at you in a cinematic fashion. I compare it to, like, in Half-Life 2, there's those moments where, like, you'll get to an elevator that you need to leave the area, but then the elevator, oh no, it's too slow, or it's too loud, or it's too broken, so you're sitting there waiting for the elevator to arrive, and you're being, you're just being outright murdered by, like, zombies that are flooding the environment. It's like, that's technically an objective in a scenario that has more to it than just running in a straight line through a level and fighting through it. But it's, you don't have to think as much. It's more like you have to adapt. Like BioShock also falls into that territory where, like, yeah, every now and then they'll do something like the Arcadia moment where in order to proceed you get locked into an area and have to fight 8 waves of enemies, so lay your traps and prepare, and that's good. That's variable, and that's variable gameplay, and any competent campaign should have stuff like that. But I liked that if you were playing on a harder difficulty of Perfect Dark, you literally could not turn your brain off. There was no, oh, I'll just run in here and wander around and it'll just work out. Like, no, you had to solve the level, and that was it's a very different feeling than a lot of the other ones are. Orb of Corruption. I don't know what that is. I don't recognize that at all. It's probably something they made up for this game. This mod. I have no idea what that is. Exciting. Isn't it exciting to not know things? What the fuck do I do with that? Right. I need you for thing. Making me fight for inventory space. Some sort of second-class citizen. There we go. I made it work. Got that out of the way. Oh no, what have I done? Ah. It's fine. We just gotta do the thing. Shit, I don't think I'm actually ready. Or, actually I haven't killed the High Council yet. Whoops. You killed my wolves! Stop killing my wolves, I like them. I'm really getting off the question now, and actually paying attention to the game more than I'm supposed to. It's partly because I have to brainstorm for video games to think about, and that's a little harder. But Perfect Dark aged super well, except for its gunplay. Its mission structures are super cool, and I love them. And that stuff I want to see more of. It hasn't had a chance to age, because people haven't iterated on that kind of stuff nearly as much as they could. The closest we have is some 0451 style games. Some stuff like Prey and Deus Ex, the modern ones and stuff like that, have a little bit of like, here's a mission and you kind of have to like solve your way into a thing and figure something out, or like Dishonored. But those are a little more open-ended than Perfect Dark stuff was. They usually give you a really specific objective, but you could solve it in a huge number of ways, which often means that if you want to, you can just turn off your brain and just bash your way through the level, and you'll be just as successful as somebody would be if they were clever about it. And that variable approaches being valid is a cool design structure, but it doesn't have that sense of you having to solve the level, because
Impossible.
do I have to like equip the flail? Is that how this works?
Impossible.
I have to ask Kane for help. I always forget about all this stuff. What is another game I can talk about that I'm nostalgic about or whatnot? This game's always identical to how I remember it. I'll come back to Diablo 2 after 5 years and be like, yes, still the same goddamn game. Yep. There's also really weird cases. There's cases like World of Warcraft. Well, you'll remember a game one way, and then you go back to it, and you're proved wrong, not because your memory was wrong, but because they changed the game when you weren't looking like an asshole. And I'm like, no, I liked that game. He's like, well, that's too bad. That game doesn't exist anymore. I'm like, but bring it back, please. My gloves suck. And these aren't that great either. But they have magic fines, so screw it. That's been documented super heavily in my Let's Play of World of Warcraft, especially the 150 episodes I did with Wander in the past and Shell, where I'm just bemoaning the fact that I'm like, what did they do? I'll look at these things later. I'm like, what did they do to my precious WoW? Because it's so... They turned it into something that was so mindless. You'd be one-shotting enemies, and nothing takes effort, and the scaling of all of the difficulty is completely shot at that point, where everything you just run around and press 1 all the time, and it just doesn't matter. It's some next level stuff when you're playing through World of Warcraft and you're used to the original WoW. Because in the original WoW, there was a dance to it. Like, a normal enemy that you were fighting one-on-one in World of Warcraft was a threat and a problem. You had to be worried about that shit. And I don't... Oh, right, I have to make Callum's will. I forgot. There's a whole risk here where you have to deal with a very real problem where, like, every enemy would be a very real threat to your entire existence. They could, if you were playing as a weaker class, a softer class, like a rogue or a mage, like a normal enemy your level that gets to wail on you will beat you. They will out DPS you and outlive you. So like you had to do stuff like you'd be a frost mage that was running sideways to strafe around your enemy and outmaneuver them and hitting them with slow spells and rooting them in place to crowd control them while you'd be maneuvering around an environment and keeping your distance and casting your spells. And some spells you had to plant your feet and cast with a casting time, whereas other spells you had to you could cast instantly, and but they cost more mana, and like you had a limited amount of mana that you were very possibly going to run out of, and like there was such a risk to it all, and it was really exciting. It was like like playing that game on a daily basis and grinding and whatnot was actually more exciting than you would think it would be. And as a rogue, which is my preferred class, you were made of tissue paper, and you were a melee character. So but the rogue's trick was that he had stuns, and he had stealth. So he could turn invisible and sneak up on a guy and do an ambush attack that would stun him, and that stun you did would buy you like 4 seconds of the enemy not being able to fight back, in which time your energy would be regenerating, and the stun itself that you did generated some combo points, which is a currency you could spend to do your attacks. And so you would carefully budget this risk reward of like how much energy is going to regenerate before his stun wears off, and how many combo points can I generate in that time, because you can do stuff like I think my loop I would do it's not a kidney strike, it was a oh, what was it? I forgot what the stealth one was called. Because there was different stuns for different situations. Specifically, I remember my groove is I would do it was cheap shot. I would open with cheap shot. That would stun the enemy for like 4 seconds or something like that. My auto attack would start. I think I might go around behind them to get a backstab, because backstab was an attack you can only do from behind, but does bonus damage with daggers and has like a good crit or something like that. But then when a stun's gonna wear off, you're like, oh shit, here it comes, and you can see the timer going down. So you would loop around to the front of the enemy to use an attack called Gouge, which was not a stealth attack. It was actually a normal combat attack. And you can only do it from the front of the enemy, but it would stun them for X number of seconds. But Gouge was this crazy thing where if the guy took any damage, it would break the stun, so they wouldn't be stunned anymore. Which means that Gouge was like a breather in the middle of the fight. You'd be taking a break, because you'd be stunning them for like 3 seconds with the Gouge, which gives you time to regenerate more of your energy meter, which means that you can do more attacks as a rogue. but you can't do DPS to the enemy with damage per second. You can't deal damage to the enemy because if you hurt them, you'll break the stun you did. So you're just buying a breather for yourself in the middle of the fight. But then the moment that gouge is about to wear off, you're like, okay, I generated combo points from my cheap shot and from my backstab and from my gouge, which I think gouge also gave you a combo point. You then could use kidney shot, which is a finishing attack. It's a finishing attack that used your combo points to spend them to get a big stun. Kidney shot itself, I don't think even did damage, but it generated... it stunned your enemy in a form like cheap shot where you could keep attacking them. And that stun, its duration was based on how many combo points you had at the time you used it, and then when you use it, you lose all of your combo points. But then that's your big stun. That's the big sustained stun of the three, and you can attack during it. So you've unlocked your ability to just go all out on this guy and try to finish him off before that that kidney shot wears off. And if you're lucky, he'll be dead before he even gets a chance to fight back. Your AI opponent. But if you're unlucky, he'll outlive that, and then you have to keep. Then you get to improvise more because like, okay, my opening pattern didn't finish off the enemy. Now I got to deal with the fact that like he's now hitting me back, and that's a threat because I'm a rogue and I only wear leather armor. I got to find what things I do. Like certain cooldowns will come back, certain abilities will become available again. Things like vanish allow you to re-enter stealth in the middle of combat and potentially start the entire loop again. Things like blind would give you the ability to do a gouge-like stun on the enemy where they would wander around. They would wander around aimlessly because they're blinded, but you weren't allowed to attack them during that duration. But it also consumed an inventory item that you had to farm for outside of combat, so you didn't want to use that all the time because it was an actual thing that would cost you something. Same thing with vanish. Vanish used to cost vanishing powder. There's all these things that would go on in my head, and so like, despite the fact that it's an MMORPG and they're so grindy and repetitive and monotonous, supposedly, that version of WoW had a lot going on. Every character I played, and it was really exciting and fun, despite the fact that it was also tedious in other ways. Like one of the things I don't like is I like the fact that you had a limited mana pool as a spellcaster, and so you had to budget your mana and not use, and you'd be worried about running out of it during combat because then you'd be doomed. But what I didn't like is that then you had to sit down and drink water for like 30 seconds to regenerate your mana between every fight. Like that kind of tedious shit is kind of pointless. But their solution was to just pump up your mana regen so much that mana doesn't even mean anything anymore. And for the majority of my time playing WoW, in the new version of WoW, mana as a concept has largely not mattered, and that's stupid. What makes way more sense is just to make it so that spellcasters, when they're outside of combat, just have a really fast mana regeneration, and when they're in combat, they don't. Then you have best of both worlds. You have challenging resource management during combat, but then outside of combat, the tedium is not there because your shit just refills, as opposed to having you sit down and drink water, which was awful. And by the way, you think that rogue stuff sounded complicated against one enemy. What do you do when there's two enemies? Like you fight a hunter type, either an actual hunter player or like a hunter class like NPC that has like a pet and they have a sidekick, or you accidentally draw in two enemies at once in one fight. Like now you gotta improvise. You're stunning one guy. You'll often be like using all of your stuns on one enemy while using all of your attacks on the other one, so you can try to turn it into a one-on-one fight. But then you're doing a one-on-one fight against that guy where all of your tricks aren't being used on him, so there's a risk to yourself. So you start popping cooldowns like evasion, which is like a 15-second. I think for 15 seconds you get a 50% dodge chance or something like that. Like a bunch of little things you can do, but only every now and then. So you can only do them in emergency situations. Like all that shit, like I knew all my tools back then to the point where they're still in my head, even though it's been like a decade since I originally played WoW, which was during the vanilla experience and during Burning Crusade. And then when Lich King came out, I have a really specific window for when I quit, because when I was quitting, Lich King was coming out to the point where I forgot to tell people I was quitting. So somebody gave me Lich King for Christmas, and I was like, oh shit, whoops, because I had already quit WoW. It was that specific of a window. I never played Lich King, never played Panda, never played Cataclysm, never played Draenor, never played... There might be other ones in there somewhere. And then we came back with I was playing the leveling experience with Wander and Shell around the time Draenor came out, and then I played... We boosted for Legion, and now we've boosted for the new expansion. But yeah, the whole time I was leveling my Worgen with Wander and Shell during the early levels, I was just continually baffled by the fact, and I'm kind of still this way with my current series with Marty and Nick too, where I'm just pressing, like, I'm kind of just pressing numbers half the time. And you can't even entirely blame it on the multiplayer aspect of it, because you'll see me wander off and fight an enemy one-on-one, and I'll just like press a couple numbers and he just dies, and I didn't think, and now I'm just like, I'm not even paying attention. Like that's what that game is now, and it's super disappointing to me, and it's why I'll never be a fan of it the way I used to be, because I used to play that game every goddamn day. Like, and a lot of it was me being idle and using it as a chat room because I was a high school student doing homework and also socializing with these online people and shit like that. But my rogue that I raided with had 300 days played, which is a terrifying thing to see. But a lot of that was idling and just using it as a chat function sometimes. But still, like that, I was in on it. And I will never be that again in its current state. And that's the really specific form of going back to a game, and it's not that your nostalgia is wrong, it's that the game is wrong. The game changed while I wasn't looking, and like, oh, that's a dick move, game. Don't just be a less good game. Damn. And if you're wondering why I'm standing here in town, it's because now that this question's over, I need to look up on Wiki and remind myself how to do this quest, because it's probably, I probably have to get Callum's brain. So mainly I need to find the Flayer dungeon, which I don't remember how to find. So I'm going to look that up real quick while I'm finding the next question. I need to craft the flail, which I think is made of the different pieces of Callum. And that's the whole thing I've lost track of. And no, this is not hypocritical for me to be lost and looking shit up and doing casual shit like that. Because this is not... Like, what's good for a mindless Q&A series is not what's good for a high-quality, engaging video game. And so, even if I... like whenever even in a real let's play, when a let's player has a dumb moment where they look something up or they don't understand something or they miss a tutorial pop-up, like that doesn't make any of the things they say about video games hypocritical. It's just they're trying to run a show and that introduces problems. But also if they miss, like even if they miss something when they're playing on their own time not doing a show, that also doesn't make it hypocritical. I see a lot of people using let's players live performance against them whenever they say things about video games, and that's like the most bullshit tactic that exists, and it's just disingenuous. Anyway, I'm gonna look up information and questions. BRB. Okay, I was able to piece together more or less where I'm trying to go. We're trying to get to the Flayer dungeon, which is in the Flayer jungle. I'm just gonna flail around in the Flayer area until I find it. Anyway, we're gonna get a couple of questions here in a row that are probably lightning round questions that might have disappointingly brief answers, but I don't have a ton to say about them necessarily, or at least I can't think of much to say about them. Well, specifically I can't think of as much to say about the second one. The first one's just a normal, just a brief question, but then we'll get to one that probably has a bit more to it. Austin asks, will you and Andrew play Diablo 2? Really enjoyed the videos you have done. Hope you guys still collab after he moves. Will we play Diablo 2? I kind of find that somewhat unlikely. Oh my god, I'm gonna die. Jesus. I think I wasn't using my weapon. That doesn't help. Damn. One thing is that... right now, Andrew lives on the other side of the world. We have a tenuous, at best, internet connection to each other. And also, Andrew, I think he kind of has a shit computer right now, too, which is not great. Did I say Diablo 2 or Dark Souls 2? He's asking about Dark Souls 2, but I feel like I said Diablo 2 because I'm playing Diablo 2. He wanted to know if we're going to play Dark Souls 2, like we played Dark Souls 1. The whole torture Andrew through the Dark Souls franchise thing. To some extent, I already see the get Andrew good at Dark Souls thing as being a success. Or, that's not the most accurate thing to call it, but, you know, the teach Andrew Dark Soulsborne thing. We already kind of succeeded at the original goal for the series, which was to get him to beat any of the Soulsborne games. The premise was that he could freely swap between them whenever if he got fully stuck anywhere, he could move on to the next game and go around them. And I built that into the structure of the series because of the fact that that was my life experience, and it's a shared experience a lot of people have had with the Souls games. I played Demon's Souls first. I beat the first boss, and then I reached the Tower Knight, I believe. and it was just such a brutal experience getting to the Tower Knight, and then I just couldn't handle the Tower Knight, and I gave up. Which is basically the exact narrative of Yahtzee Krishaw, Zero Punctuation's review of Demon's Souls, actually. He has the exact same story where he, like, beats the first boss, tries to get to the second zone. It's so brutal, and he gives up, and talks about how anyone would be insane to even try to play this franchise, and, you know, that whole conversation. But then Dark Souls comes out, and I get to give it another go. And that was also the first Let's Play we ever did. And it grew on me significantly the second time around when I was more exposed to it, and then I eventually beat Dark Souls. And I think Yahtzee's story was also that, like, he came around to the series, and around, like, the second or third chance he had to try to play one of them, and now he's a big old fan of them, and that's like a whole redemption arc of sorts, is seeing that turnaround of, basically. And that repeats a lot. Like, I remember also watching Game Grumps, and they played Demon's Souls, and I was like, oh my god, here comes Demon's Souls, and then they just gave up, like, in less than an hour of gameplay, basically. But now their channel features hundreds of videos of the Soulsborne quintilogy universe, whatever the fuck thing. It's not really a franchise, or at least two of them are not in a franchise with the other ones, but, you know, they're very comparable gameplay, and the same developer. And so, like, that, I built that into the premise that Andrew was allowed to switch games, and we did, although not necessarily for the reason, partly for the reasons I thought he would, which is that we got backed into a corner mechanically because of the fact that Demon's Souls allows you to run out of healing items, which is brutal, actually. And so he gave up on Demon's Souls, then moved to Dark Souls and did that. In a lot of ways, I see, even though the Demon's Souls has easier bosses, I think Demon's Souls might be one of the more punishing games in the entire, out of all the ones they've made, especially for new players, partly because of the fact that you can straight out run out of healing items, and you can permanently damage things. Like, you can turn your character and the world into states that make the game more difficult across the board because of the world and character tendency features of that game and stuff like that. And you, when you die, you lose half your health bar and have to use a limited resource to get it back, or use multiplayer, which doesn't exist anymore, to get it back. A bunch of other stuff. Like, Dark Souls is, despite some takes on its difficulty, is actually, in many ways, the easiest game in the franchise, because you always have full health no matter what, which is only true for that game out of all the ones that are called Souls games. Bloodborne also has max health all the time, but it's just Dark Souls and Bloodborne. Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, and Demon's Souls all have variable health bars. They recontextualized it in Dark Souls 3 to make you feel better, but it's the same mechanic. You still don't have your maximum health until you use an item that makes you have your maximum health. It's just they act like you're increasing your health instead of regaining lost health, but there's no functional difference between those two. It's just how they package it and sell it to you to make you feel better about it. But Dark Souls does not cut your health in half. It has almost no permanent punishments. Just across the board, if you just keep dying over and over and over and over again against bosses for hundreds of times, there's no consequences. The worst that can happen is you can lose the souls that you got playing through that zone, which you can get back by playing through that zone again. Like, that's how minor the setback is. But but Dark Souls, Demon's Souls, and whatnot have, like, actual permanent losses that you don't get back by just playing more in some cases, and various other things that happen to you while you're playing it. And so I was not surprised when we had to give up on Demon's Souls. I was a little surprised when we got through Dark Souls, because I kind of thought we'd have to bounce again, because I thought he'd have to play the beginnings of multiple games in order to get it going. I had a similar experience trying to play, I tried to introduce my brother to Bloodborne, and he could not beat, like, the first courtyard of the game, basically. It wasn't possible. It's like that. I'm used to trying to walk people through Soulsborne games, and so I just wanted to film that learning experience, because I find that curve satisfying, and also I never documented it for myself. My first encounter with Demon's Souls was not recorded because it was in 2009. My first encounter with Dark Souls was recorded, but only my first encounter. That was not a full playthrough. We did not finish it there. In fact, we kind of stopped the series because I also wasn't sure if I wanted to keep doing Let's Plays in general back then, and I wasn't really recording that. And I just went home and hung out and just beat the game over the course of like weeks on my own time. And that's when the franchise was sold for me. And so my learning curve is lost to time, and so I kind of wanted to document Andrew's and experience that. Given infinite time, I wouldn't be against playing every single game with Andrew, but he'd have to be up for that. And now that he's not local, it's significantly harder because of all the things we can do Let's Play wise, we could reasonably play some indie games that probably work on his laptop and stuff like that, which I don't think is a gamer laptop. It's one he has for work now. Because indie games can just run on all sorts of things. And he can do things where we can do what we're doing right now, which this isn't aired yet, but you guys will now know. We're currently recording, I think it's called 428 or something. It has a number at the beginning of its title. Shibuya Scramble. We're playing another visual novel after Zero Escape. We've already started recording it. But the thing about that is that that's the thing where I'm the one playing the video game, and it's on my computer, and I'm just live streaming a video feed to Andrew, and he's watching that and doing commentary remotely. But he's not involved in the video game, and so it's more... So while I can include him in commentary on games, it'll be harder to include him in... It's hard to do the other way around, where he's playing the game and streaming it to me, and I'm doing the remote commentary, which is what would be involved if he played something like Diablo, like Dark Souls 2. And I don't know. I just don't know if Dark Souls 2 would ever work on his computer. I don't know if he'd be willing to play it, and you know, a bunch of other stuff. Also, people, man. Some Andrew playthroughs do well, and some Andrew playthroughs do not do well, but pretty much universally Dark Souls does well on my channel. If I remember correctly what the numbers were like on that, that was not an Andrew series that did well, was Andrew playing Dark Souls. People like the Zero Escape stuff significantly more than they like the Andrew playing Dark Souls stuff. They just get alienated by his behavior and his commentary and his responses to the game, and a lot of them don't find it funny. And people just get bored and stop watching, and it's actually, I think it's probably the least viewed Dark Souls content on my channel, which is a channel where Dark Souls stuff just does well by default, because I have an audience for that stuff. Specifically that one, I remember doing surprisingly not well. And it was noteworthy that when I played the remastered edition, only months later, it's the same campaign overall, but it was just me playing without Andrew. That did way better than me playing with Andrew by a significant margin. I find that interesting and kind of noteworthy, the way that stuff works. I gotta do all this crap in my inventory now. I'm picking up too many healing potions. I almost need like an auto clean button so that I can go back to commentary. So, I don't know, never say never, but there's no plans right now, and Andrew doesn't have any particular interest in it. And I'm sure we'd rather play 100 other things that are more in line with the kind of crap we'd like to play collectively. Like, maybe I'll stream Deadly Premonition to him and he'll do commentary on that while we're playing, or maybe we'll play, like, Monster Prom, I think it was called, is like the kind of silly shit we'd like to play. Or Overcooked and stuff like that. Of all things, I don't think Dark Souls is so immediately in the docket for my Andrew content, necessarily. As per usual, I look at all this shit between, because it's too much to parse right now. That's the main thing. We are currently doing more stuff, though. And that's all tentative. Right now, Andrew's, he lives abroad, but he is doing his schooling still. And so, right now, he's kind of more available because he's still doing the schooling. In the future, he might become less available when he actually gets the job that he's trying to get and stuff like that. Then he might become unavailable again. So as a result, also, the any podcast stuff you see is like right now we don't have a schedule for the podcast. It's been back for one episode now, which this is all this is all news in that none of this stuff was true when the email was sent to me. That is this question. So like the context for this question has changed since it was sent to me. Also, I was like, these are lightning round questions, and I'm still going in on every single element of it more than I thought it was going to be like a 2-sentence answer. But yeah, it's just all up in the air. We hang out, we choose stuff to do. This isn't his job, so as his life obstacles increase, it might be harder and harder to get him involved. Like right now, he's in an intermediate step where he's finishing his degree and then job hunting. But once he has the job, and it's supposed to be like, I think it's supposed to be these kind of brutal jobs where it's beyond the normal work days that Americans even work, for example, he might get significantly more busy, and we might say goodbye to him for quite some time until he is done with that country or something. I don't know. It's already hard enough to deal, to plan stuff because he's on the opposite side of the world now. So our entire clock is inverted. We spend a lot of the year with a 12-hour difference. So like, we spend half of each other's days sleeping and stuff like that. And then you add in like jobs and other stuff, and it's just like at some point it's just not feasible. Like if we gave the Andrew stuff a good run. I made content with him since 2011. And it was never successful and never a viable source of income, and ultimately that experiment has largely failed. And anything that you get out of me and Andrew as a group should be kind of seen as like bonus footage, essentially, like stuff that we do because we find the time and it works out, because it's definitely like he makes no money off of it, and it's not any sort of noteworthy part of my career monetarily. And that's just the reality. That's the capitalist reality of the situation. Is just that's just not where the money is. And so he has to move on as an adult and make a life of him that he's happy with or something. And I gotta keep doing my thing. And we will probably grow apart over time or something. I don't know. I have no idea how this is gonna turn out, so I don't really have answers for you by and large. But look forward to Shibuya Scramble, I guess, if you like the Zero Escape series, but you're asking about Dark Souls, which means you might not even like the Zero Escape series, in which case, I don't even have good news for you, then. Whoops. All munchkins must die. Are they called munchkins in this? No, they're called, what are they called? They're called fetishes in this game? I don't remember. They've got, they had some kind of odd name. I always wanted the Delirium rune word. That was one of my goals back in the day. Was to get Delirium. I guess they're just called demons in this game. I wanted the Delirium rune word because it had a chance of turning you into one of those little guys, and you just run around as a little skeleton, a tiny micro skeleton man, and stab the shit out of people. Sometimes it was just the weirdest rune word, and I wanted it, but the runes were too expensive, and no one would trade them to me. And the bartering, I'm not a big fan of bartering, so I kind of moved on when I failed to magic find it for myself. Oh yeah, pump up that rabies. Rabies. It's a weird thing to have as your primary attack, but it causes tons of poison damage. The next question is from OmgAGiantRock, a giant rock. If you could make any talk show / discussion / review show or podcast, what sort of show would you like to make, and who would you prefer to see / hear on it? I've tried to think of an answer for this one. I kind of don't have anything, honestly. I like a lot of video essays. I like media analysis stuff, but I also enjoy people just trying to analyze the world and try to find solutions to major problems. I like intelligent discussions. I enjoy a lot of different things, but really, like, the issue I always have with these questions is that all I can do is just essentially point at things that I already like, and it's not useful to talking about something that I want that doesn't exist. And I don't have a really specific keyhole to fill, or whatever the fuck, to, I don't have a really specific want that already exists. So it really just boils down to, there's like types of people and types of tones and so on I like. I've seen a number of different comedy specials and talk shows and podcasts and things that I enjoy, and it's it. Like it's hard to do anything besides just point at things I like and be like, more please, but really what I really want is something to surprise me and come out of nowhere and just, you know, just show up and not be something I was asking for, but something that I enjoyed. Like, I think of, what was the name of that comedy special that had a terrible, unhelpful name to try to remember? I think it was Nanette? Let's see. Googling things. Yeah, Nanette. Yeah, the Hannah Gadsby Nanette comedy special. Like, that came out of fucking nowhere. And that was like an emotional journey, and it was insightful, and it was just a portal into someone's life, and it was just genuine and honest in a lot of ways that were helpful. And like, that kind of stuff's great. I love that stuff. And a lot of people get really mad at that stuff, but like a lot of that stuff is just like, it's just someone being very honest and genuine and forthcoming with their life experience, and a lot of that stuff is really helpful. And I don't know, I feel like people just get mad for political reasons, and I'm not interested in their why as much. My podcasts are all over the place, by the way. I listen to comedy podcasts, but I also listen to a few podcasts that are just a couple people talking, as Gray and Brady put it with Hello Internet, the two dudes talking genre. I listen to the Rooster Teeth podcast and their Off Topic podcast, which is just people talking. But I also really enjoy stuff like You Are Not So Smart podcast, or Radiolab, or This American Life, or a bunch of other 99% Invisible, like a bunch of different podcasts that are just about these detailed accountings of stories of different people, or scientific discoveries, or just things like audio documentaries, essentially. And then I also enjoy I think my particular favorite of the two dudes talking thing was probably, I'm a really big fan of the Dear Hank and John, which is the Vlogbrothers, which I've been following them on YouTube for an incredibly long time, and they have a podcast together, and as you imagine, they're both incredibly charming and entertaining people to just listen to, because that's been the basis of their job for like a decade now. But they're also two very different people, personality-wise and belief-wise and experience-wise, and so on, because one of them's all science-heavy and one of them's a young adult novelist, and they have different health problems and different mental problems and different experiences and live in different states, and so like they come at things in different ways, but in a friendly way, and they do like a thing that's kind of comedy and kind of insightful, and it's kind of not serious but can be very serious, where they take viewer questions and they give them, as they call, dubious advice, and it's just I've been addicted to their general tone and way of approaching things for a very long time, to the point where it's hard to quantify it meaningfully. But there's also, John Green does a performative podcast called The Anthropocene Reviewed, which is very much not what these types of things tend to be, but it's also not what a lot of other ones tend to be. Like, there's a lot of these documentary podcasts, like Radiolab and stuff like that, where somebody comes with like a story, they're here to report about something, like when 99% Invisible is going to talk to you about this particular low-cost housing development that existed in this country and what its lifespan was like, and these failings and stuff like that. John Green does a thing called the Anthropocene Reviewed, which is he reviews human-era things, and he does it via a pre-written script that he clearly, like, you know, like the thing he writes in advance, and he's just performing the script, basically. But it's just, he always comes up with something insightful to draw from whatever said topic is, as opposed to being like a literal review. And the way that he can process things, look at the world, is probably the reason why I've been conned into reading like 5 of his YA novels when I don't care about I don't really care about, like, oh man, is that teenager gonna date that teenager? But but in between all of that stuff is so many observations and way of looking at things and ways of processing things that I find so much more compelling that I can just look past the plot and characters of the thing I'm going through. It's a really weird way to experience stuff sometimes. But it's not wrong. In that that's one of the things when people talk about the books being better than the movies in some cases, is sometimes you have cases like this where all of the non-dialogue, non-action text in the book was the compelling part at times, in a way that if you just turn the actual story into a movie, you just kind of get that story on its flat terms without any of the additional stuff. And some authors live in that texture, and some authors do not, and whatnot. And I am not a good book reviewer, so I don't really have a lot to say on that subject, but that was just a bunch of tangential stuff related to the talk show things. At the end of the day, I just don't have much to say. I like to be surprised. A lot of my favorite things in a particular year to watch and read and engage with and so on are things that I didn't know to ask for. And I think that's kind of the cool part, is just being open to surprises and letting them happen. Slyflesh asks, I have a question for your question thing. Do you think that playing games as a job ever affects your enjoyment of them? Like, does it ever seem like work and lessens your enjoyment of them? Make them feel like more of a chore than if you were just casually playing? Or conversely, does the nature of commentating and thinking involved in that, and the sweet patron bucks of course, actually enhance your enjoyment? I've covered this a few times, I think, in a few different contexts. Why do I have a blue item in my inventory? Ew. I specifically don't pick those up on purpose. I would say generally it's actually a net positive in a lot of ways. There's definitely some drawbacks. It still hasn't broken, so I still haven't switched back to the other one yet. There's definitely drawbacks here and there, in that it's mandatory fun time, which is a thing where actually I should check on my I should check on that. Let's see how that went. I probably didn't even get a response at all, but I was just curious. Nope, no response. On Imager, somebody was like repeating that adage of like, if you work every day, what is it called? Shit. The one where like, if you do what you love for a living, you never work a day in your life. And I'm like, that's oof. I was responding to that comment when I saw that, because I'm like, that is a myth. There might be. I think the only people that don't work a day in their life are people who have non-jobs. Like, they're trust fund kids that have a token job, but really they get to do whatever the fuck they want, whatever they want all day, and money just kind of happens at them with little to no effort. If you have to actually do a daily job of any sort that has hours and everything, and like and requires time to it, that's always going to feel like a job on some level. That's always going to be kind of true. Even people that play video games, especially if they play video games for any significant amount of time. Like, some people make like a 10-minute video every day or less, and those channels probably do kind of feel like that. But if you're somebody who makes hours of videos, or you stream all day, or do a bunch of other things that are time consuming, like on some level you definitely view your job as a job, and it still feels like a job that you have to do on some level, no matter how positive you feel about the overall experience. And that's part of that comes down to just to have the fact that you have time, you have an allotted amount of time every day to have that day. And what infringes on that is having time requirements. Like, I have to spend this much of the day doing these things. And like and like doing what I have, especially being self-employed with like lacking like a boss and definitive hours and stuff like that. And like the thing where like if you work a normal day job, often there's a lot of situations where if a thing doesn't get done on time, oh well, because my hours are over and I'm gonna go home now, and I guess this project might just lag a bit, but you know, that's life and stuff like that. But if I let that happen as for me, if I'm behind schedule, I just have to work more. Like, I have to just make it up by losing even more of my day and stuff like that. Like, some of that stuff happens, and I definitely am super aware of the fact that I've just watched as I've fallen into all of the traps that my dad fell into. Because my dad was a self-employed man. He still works at his place still. And my dad has no employees. He just works at a shop alone all day at a blue-collar job, and he just has to hope people come in to pay him, like that people come in and customers keep showing up, which has not historically been a problem because he's like one of the only people in his entire town that does what he does, so people always come flowing in. It's more, but the issue is he has this massive schedule, this nightmarishly overstuffed calendar of all the jobs that need to get done, and if he gets behind the schedule on anything or anything goes wrong, he just has to put in even more hours. And I have had a very long back history of just him not being around a lot of the time because of the fact that he's just at work all the time. During a lot of my childhood, one of the upsides was the fact that like, one, I was a little cut off from other people as a result, but one of the upsides was that because I was often at my dad's work, I got to see my dad a lot more than I would have otherwise because of the fact that I was actually at his work. Because my brother and I had like a little, like a playroom, essentially. We had an isolated little kids room where we could hang out and play video games and watch whatever TV could be received via bunny ears, which was basically just KQC 58, which would show us like WB cartoons like Animaniacs until it switched over to adult stuff, and it was time to watch. Then it was time to watch Simpsons, Third Rock from the Sun, and Star Trek, and that's why I grew up on entire. This is all the reason why I grew up watching Next Generation every day, and why. Well, I'm not one of those people that's like encyclopedically obsessed with it and can remember every episode like Red Letter Media or something, but I'm familiar with a lot of the storylines, which I experienced in random order because it was on television. I still haven't successfully watched the show from front to back in one continuous go. I've made it a few attempts, and maybe I'll try again soon on Netflix or something, if it's even there anymore. But I love that show, and it probably shaped a lot of how I think about a lot of things. And I was watching it every day, and it kind of raised me a little bit. Like that kind of stuff. This is super off topic, or not really, whatever. It's more that I've lost the thread a little bit, is what I should say. But he's always fallen into this trap of working too much, like putting in too many hours, letting his obligations inflate his day, and so on and so forth, and all those other issues. And I definitely feel myself getting into that sometimes, where like I'll go out for my morning walk, and then I'll be like, oh, I want to keep Andrew on the channel, so I made time for like a 2-hour recording with Andrew recently, because I wanted to try to make progress, and like maybe that'll be what I air after Zero Escape or something like that. But then it's like, okay, now we got to do a Q&A series for like, I gotta do the 90-minute Q&A. Specifically, like I did in addition to my normal schedule stuff of the current shows, 2 days ago I did a 2-hour podcast with Andrew. Yesterday I did a 2-hour recording with Andrew of Shibuya Scramble. Today I'm doing what may be a 2-hour Q&A video, and that's in addition to the fact that I'm making 6 videos per day that are about 30 minutes each, and then tonight I'm going to buckle down with the crew to play probably 2 hours of Monster Hunter World, and all this stuff just keeps stacking and demanding more time. And some of these things will have to change at some point, because like if I want to have a life where like I go out for dinner or like spend time with people, like those things always stand in direct opposition to some of these ideas. Like one of my hopes is that if I live around Wander and Bird and so on, that you guys actually might see a bit less multiplayer, because even though it's easier access, I think that just being able to be having each other in accessible locale and whatnot may lead to us just actually hanging out in evenings and stuff like that, like normal people, as opposed to streaming multiplayer stuff. And not only is that probably better for our relationships to have that as an option, but yeah, the two are kind of in direct conflict with each other to an extent, because if you want to have an evening ever, then it's not a good plan to have a nightly 7 to 9 o'clock stream every single day if you ever want to do anything with your evening. And it'll be thrown around jokingly like, oh yeah, no multiplayer tonight because Keith has a life or something like that, because I'll be going off and I'll be at a family get-together or something, or some other thing has happened where I'm not available, and like that'll be the little throwaway joke. But like, to some extent, that is the kind of terrifying trap of it all. And that has slightly less to do with work and more that we're trying to maintain our connections, and we do it in the structured format of doing it as nightly multiplayer stuff. But the fact that I make the value that it serves is shown by the fact that I keep making time for it, because it does help me to some extent too, even if it's not always stuff that, it's basically never stuff that does well on the channel and whatnot, and it actually actively bloats my day in a weird, confusing way, especially on the bad days where I haven't quite finished my daily recordings before that happens. So then I have to after that ends, like relaunch BioShock and go right back to it and stuff like that. We're really off topic at this point, but we're just getting back to the time management issues and how do you figure out life-work balance when you have a fun, quote-unquote, job, like where you just screw around all the time and you work from home so you don't have structure and stuff like that. That's all a whole thing. Which, yeah, at this point I've gone over that enough times that it's kind of redundant. This was very complain heavy, which is not where I was going for, but that's the first neural pathway we explored, I suppose, because I actually really like my job. I have a very high respect for how good I have it, specifically because of how much I hated my last job when I worked in a cubicle and was Googling depression and stuff like that, which I don't think I had, but that was I think I talked about this in a previous episode, the idea where I found out that like the guy who came up with cubicles hates their existence because he thinks that they're in like a net negative on society that damages people and stuff like that, and it's like, oh great, glad we still use them. Hooray. Hooray. This is a convoluted ass map to navigate. As far as the actual question, because I talked about the work concept mainly because it's fresh in my mind because I responded to that one comment and no one's responded to my comment, unfortunately. Because I was kind of curious to see if there'd be a debate or someone having. One of the things that I sometimes expect is that when you talk about like you never work a day in your life not being really true in reality, when you have a one like the dream jobs and stuff like that, is that people have no sympathy for you. They'll be like, eh, fuck you, basically is the response. It's like, I'd take that in an instant, and I'm like, oh yeah, you would. And you'd be right to. Like, this is good. But it's just the concept that people, it's just the specific phrasing is so bad. Like that concept that if you love your job you never work, it's like no, because the thing about work is that it's mandatory, and the thing about hobbies and things you enjoy is that they tend to not be mandatory, and the moment you make your hobby mandatory, it recontextualizes it, and you do have days where you just have to sit down and force yourself to do a thing even though you like it. It's like imagine if somebody asked you to play a tabletop game every single day, over and over again. Every day. It sounds exciting at first, right? Like, oh cool, yeah, that'll be a fun week. Let's do a whole week of tabletop games. What about a whole month? What about a whole year? What about a whole decade of the same tabletop game or something like that? Or just always have to play a tabletop game every day? What if you got a headache that day? What if you just didn't sleep that well? What if you're just not feeling tabletop right now? Like, I can kind of see why like Game Grumps has been spreading out lately. They've been doing this series called the 10-minute Power Hour, where it's live action stuff, and it's like, oh, see, because they started their Let's Play channel in 2012, and they know their audience is ultimately there for them, and not necessarily for the games all the time. So they're diversifying their content a little bit and experimenting with different formats, specifically because they might feel slightly claustrophobically trapped with the idea of always doing the same thing. And I can totally get where that would come from if you have been doing the same thing for that long, because I've been doing it for longer. I started Let's Plays like 6 months before Game Grumps even started, so I'm somewhat aware of that. This sounds like burnout. I actually don't really have burnout. It's more just a realistic... I'm just trying to give you guys a more realistic impression of the situation, which is that it's not that I have burnout, it's that I need to look up where Column's heart is now, god damn it. It's not that I specifically have burnout, it's that, how do I put this? I mean, I guess it's somewhat what I've already said. It's just that it is still a job. It is a commitment. You do have to do it. All of the this is mandatory feelings that jobs give you don't go away the moment it's a fun job. And so those color the experience. Oh, I'm going back to the fucking sewers. Ah, I didn't explore them correctly, apparently. Great. And that's always going to be true. I didn't actually look up where the sewers are. Bizarre. Okay. I'm like, oh shit, there's several parts of Kurast. Where was the sewers? There it is. So the obligation is basically what I'm trying to stress, is that when it's your job, it is an obligation, and you'll see YouTubers that, you have to treat it like an obligation, because you'll see that some YouTubers can be weirdly lax and all over the place with their upload schedule, and they can quickly find themselves in a financial hole if they make that mistake of not really just sticking to it, because YouTube does not reward channels that have sporadic inactivity in many cases, and just doing this whenever you feel like it is not a good idea, and not how anyone should approach the job if they are going to turn it into a job, and so on. I'm just gonna be I think I'm just gonna be pancaking or waffling or floundering or whatever the fuck the right word is for this, if I try to explain this specific thought, but I'm going for a really specific nuanced thing where it's not a bad thing, it's just not as good as people phrase it as being, because it's, the dream job concept is not the entirely accurate way of interpreting how it works, because the dream job, I think at the end of the day, the dream job is the one that's not a job. Basically. Like, if you're just doing whatever you feel like and being happy and whatnot, that's the dream job, which, I don't know, on some level, if you're just, like... There's some people who are so famous and rich that they don't have to try, and it might just be that people follow them around with cameras and make stuff about them, or money just happens at them, and they might not even be like on-screen celebrities at this point. They might just make money through other ways that are kind of automated, and those people to some extent have the dream job in that they don't have a job as opposed to something that they actually have to commit to all the time. And those are the assholes that'll be like, follow your dreams, as like genuine advice to everybody, which is like dangerous ass shit. People like Taylor Swift or Danny Sexbang will just be like, follow your dreams. I'm like, Danny, no, Danny. Things weren't, as far as I'm aware, it seems like things weren't working out for you financially, and you kind of drifted around like a hippie for like decades, and then you got picked up by a show that was already popular and casted onto it as like a co-star, and then you just are now more successful than ever before. And it's not that you didn't earn that, but you kind of fell into it in what's obviously like some really cosmic level like coincidences and surprises that you couldn't have planned for, and that you can't just give people the advice to follow their dreams willy-nilly as if that happens, because it doesn't. Like, I have inspired, like, 7 of my friends into making Let's Play channels, and guess how many of them are successful channels? Haha. And no, that's not, I'm not counting Wander in that. I mean people that I knew in real life that didn't have Let's Play channels, and then they met, and then they found out about mine, and then, well, lo and behold, look at them having a Let's Play channel, isn't that interesting? That kind of stuff. And they'll last a few weeks, or a few months, or maybe even a year, and they won't make any real progress, and they'll get disillusioned, and then it'll go away, and they bought like a microphone, they bought some hardware for that shit, like that was a thing, and I'm just not gonna pick up any more items. I've filled up. And it all amounted to nothing. Like, they didn't make any money from the experience, and a lot of the times people who do what I do find that they don't actually like doing it, is the takeaway. It's actually some people find it stressful. I think I kind of did early on too. It's hard to replicate the thoughts because it's so long ago. But what I do is a whole weird process of its own, like, and you probably should be a little concerned about how you present yourself, and people who aren't are the ones that I think do especially bad. Like, I watched my friend, I think I watched my friend Max streaming at one point, because he just tried streaming, and I was like, wow, he's like not even, he has a face cam, I guess, and he's like not even doing any commentary, he's just kind of hanging out and playing a video game. And I'm like, huh, okay. I mean, I guess it's not stressful for him because he's not really trying. But then when people are trying to scramble for commentary, a lot of them find that their brain is just kind of fried in like 10 minutes. Like, they have to take a break because trying to play a video game live while doing a show on some level is actually like, just like a whole experience that a lot of people can, there we go, I found it. That a lot of people find draining and difficult, and it's actually really informative at times to watch the World of Warcraft Scaling World playthrough I'm doing with Marty and Nick, because a lot of the time you can watch the difference in goals from person to person between me and Marty and Nick and our various levels of understanding and value placed on the idea of doing a show. In particular, you can watch Nick's commentary throughout those playthroughs, and how he just kind of sits there, and sometimes he responds to people, and sometimes he'll just sit there in silence for 15 minutes straight, and stuff like that. And it's like, he knows it's being recorded, but he either doesn't have the skills developed to do the commentary, or just doesn't particularly care or think about the commentary. And so, as a result, he's just kind of hanging out quietly, and not really doing a show. And it's been a really interesting exercise, because throughout the show, I'm the seasoned Let's Player, I guess, and Marty is more aware and has been in stuff before and understands the stuff and watches it constantly, so he knows what I'm going for. And so, in practice, a huge amount of the Let's Play is me kind of fishing for discussion topics and questions out of Marty, and then sometimes Nick chimes in. Like, you can actually hear me going into interview mode, where I'm just trying to probe for any discussion to happen, and I'm trying to just introduce subjects on a regular basis. I'm definitely gonna have to put a portal here and just loot this whole place and siphon out all my items and sort through all my loot after this episode is over, to deal with the amount of crap in here, basically. It's a good thing we're closing out the episode pretty soon here, I think. So that's informative if you want to check that out. I also... what was it? I'm gonna do something I don't normally do, which is recommend, if you're curious about some of this stuff. Let's see. I'm trying to see if I can find the original one. I think it's this one. Yeah, I think this is the one. I talk about Game Grumps a lot because I've been watching them ongoing throughout the entirety, and sometimes I watch them for reasons that are specific to me. Oh yeah, I left a comment, so it's even more convenient. So at one point on Game Grumps, I think Danny was sick or gone or something, and they're normally a two-player commentary show. Like imagine an entire show where every single video is like me and Andrew, and not like some other combination thereof. No single videos and stuff like that. Out of nowhere, we suddenly had videos where it was just Aaron on his own after all these years of being used to two-person commentary. And so he did this Mega Man X series. It's like the video that I'm looking at right now is called Mega Man X, Just the Aarons, Part 1, Game Grump. Because I guess Danny was sick and they had to make videos and they didn't have any backlog, so he just had to go for it. And it's... I can actually read my comment out loud, which is probably hidden and invisible publicly because it only has one upvote, so it's definitely not normally visible. But I said, "This is so oddly cathartic to watch because I've lived it. You get used to recording with someone for years, and the moment you go solo, you just keep realizing all the different ways you subconsciously relied on them during episodes. You can almost hear him talking, hear him thinking, well, crap, and now I need to think of what to say next because no one is here to respond to me." It really hit me when he was doing the boss and started speaking as an armadillo. As Armadillo, he is the boss in the Mega Man game that he was like voicing like as a joke. Normally, Danny would imitate or add to the impression, or he would otherwise interrupt with something else, and the flow would continue. Instead, you can just kind of hear it peter out as Aaron realizes the boss is taking a little too long to die, and he needs to think of something else to do before he makes one joke for way too long. Solo commentary is a whole new beast. It's no longer a conversation, or at least not the same kind. It's really weird getting the urge to make someone laugh while no one else is even in the room. I kind of wish I could watch him grow into it, but I assume this is just a 7 episodes thing to fill the gap in the schedule before being gone for good. I was a little wrong. They did eventually come back to very occasional solo stuff when other plans fell through, basically. But yeah, that was the comment I wrote at the time, which was read by probably 0 people, basically. But yeah. Man, I'm articulate, aren't I? Sometimes I look at old comments I don't remember making, and I'm like, oh, this is nicely written little thing. You can tell that I've watched too many John Green and Zave Frank videos, and like some of the observation and meaning finding is all thrown in there. But yeah, like I did 2 years of Let's Plays with Andrew before I started doing solo stuff, and it's a totally different beast to bounce off of somebody commentary wise and stuff like that versus just being the whole show yourself. Like I can be tired and exhausted and all these other things that can make it harder and harder to record in a particular day. I've had days where I like pace around in circles in the living room just trying to like I don't know what's happening right now in the game, honestly. There's like barking happening. I can have these days where I'm trying to like get rid of the lethargy. Like I don't know, something about me, like what's going on. Like I'm not in the mood. Like how do I hype myself up? Like I'll be like walking around in circles in the living room, and let's try eating this thing or drinking this thing, or just try doing something to get myself in the right headspace because I feel foggy or I feel odd or whatever. And none of that stuff applies when I'm with another person because it's so different. And in so many ways when you play with other people. The energy levels are different. There's people there to respond live to the things you say. You can you'll notice that like I'll just engage on these missions to like make Bird or Andrew laugh, and there'll be like a whole chunk of an episode where it's like me iterating on a thing to fuck with somebody or to like yes and some joke that we were working on and stuff like that, whereas when you're alone there's no response to anything, and half the time when people respond to something being funny, I actually don't even entirely remember which thing that they thought was funny what it was, because the reaction actually cements the thing in your brain. So like a lot of the stuff I do multiplayer with people, and I'm just hanging out here because I need to deal with all this stuff basically. A lot of stuff I do with multiplayer with people is actually more memorable than the stuff I do single player, because of the fact that we can just use this at least. There we go. Now I've got Callum's will. A lot of the stuff I do with multiplayer is made more memorable because I'll make a joke or say something and a bunch of people will laugh, or I'll laugh at something funny that someone else thought of, and that social interaction actually makes the interaction, that moment, more memorable than a lot of the stuff that happens with me, where sometimes I'll do something in a solo Let's Play that is really funny, and when I go back and look at it, I laugh at the thing that I said, but unless somebody links to it, I wouldn't have even rediscovered my own thing that happened, because a lot of my commentary dumps out of my brain because it's just what's it called? Stream of consciousness, and without a reaction, your brain doesn't know which stuff to keep versus other stuff, as far as like which stuff's good and more memorable and to keep around and whatnot. I still haven't actually answered the question, though, which is, do you think that playing games affects your enjoyment of them? And that's like a yes, no. I think I've discussed this before a little bit, but I think to some extent, I think having to do a show helps you revise what you value in video games. Because I enjoy games more now that I'm doing a show than I did, I think, before I was doing said show. I think that gamers have bad tendencies with video games that are swatted down a little bit by doing a show where you're concerned about entertaining other people. Because what's entertaining for other people is also often more entertaining for you. I used to play a lot of grindy games. I played a lot of Dynasty Warriors, a lot of music games, a lot of Diablo, a lot of World of Warcraft, a lot of MMOs, a lot of grindy, repetitive RPGs, even some JRPGs, like a lot of very repetitive, monotonous stuff. Like, if I wasn't a Let's Player, I'd probably be a bigger fan of Warframe, because I'd be sucked into the Skinner's boxes and shit like that. Like, I might have enjoyed that garbage that was Fortnite more at the time. And that's because when playing games is not your job, and you're not trying to make it entertaining for other people, oftentimes you're just kind of filling time. And the game is kind of like a default activity that you fall back into when you're looking for entertainment. Like, you just kind of, like, if you're like me, you might just take it for granted that going back and playing a video game is just often what you will do to entertain yourself on a given day. Your routine is to go to school or college or your job, then come home and eat and maybe hang out on TeamSpeak or Discord is the modern thing to call it, to refer to now. Like, hang out on TeamSpeak, I said it again, with your friends and play Fortnite or Factorio or World of Warcraft with them. And, or like, I would be multitasking, because I'd be, and I've talked about this during playthroughs like Nier and stuff like that, where I had a reduced memory of games like Nier because of the fact that I was multitasking. I played Fallout 3 and New Vegas while hanging out in party chat with various people that were on my Xbox Live friends list, and just talking to them while multitasking and playing the game. I played games like Nier while listening to podcasts or watching YouTube videos, and like doing stuff where I was doing more than one thing at a time, and that actually reduced the impact that those games would have on me and my memory for things that happen in them, to the point where like the hypocrisy was called out when I was playing Nier, because people were like, how can you say this game's so iconic and memorable and interesting if you don't remember it? And I had to explain the fact that I didn't experience it properly when I played it. And that can go both ways with Let's Plays. If you play multiplayer Let's Plays and you're like me, then there's definitely a very real thing where you can get distracted from the game and it can be hard to take in what's happening. Like, there's a significant percentage of times where I play multiplayer Let's Plays with the group where I struggle to even tell you what the story is, because it's so, my brain has so much space being taken up by the other people in the group and stuff like that. It happens less with Andrew, because Andrew and I are pretty focused on the game, and in fact we're searching all the dialogue and plot points for things to riff on for our commentary, so paying attention to the story is actually really important a lot of the time when we're playing like Alone in the Dark or Zero Escape and stuff like that. But with the Wanderer Durf Bird group, fuck, I can't tell what's happening at all. Like, the game could be shouting a tutorial message at me non-stop for 30 minutes straight, and I might not ever notice that it's happening on the side of the screen because of the fact that like I am trying to keep up with all the conversation that's happening right now and so on and things like that. But yeah, but I found that I had bad tendencies when I was playing just for the sake of playing games. Like, I had a GameFly account where I was kind of just renting games for the sake of getting their achievements. Like I was achievement hunting during the Xbox 360, PS3 era. And I'd be like, I had the experience of like renting stuff like I think Fight Night Round 3, the game where you just punch somebody in the balls over and over again, or you headbutt them over and over again, doing illegal moves with cheats turned on, and you'll beat the entire game in like an hour and get 1,000 gamer score and stuff like that. Like, I've done some of those, not all of them. I definitely never rented Avatar: The Last Airbender for the part where you get 1,000 achievement points in like 30 seconds and stuff like that, but I was aware of them because I was active in the True Achievements community and trueachievements.com, which is still a website, but I haven't posted on it for like since college. But like I used to experience games in a way that I find now to be a less good way. Now that I'm going it this way, when I look back, are those beavers or rats down there? I just noticed those things that are by the rat, by the wolf. There's a bunch of little animals down there. That's trippy. Yeah, those are little rats. Huh? I've never noticed those. I don't think. But no, I find that doing solo Let's Plays of games actually enhances how much I pay attention to them, especially since I am afraid that I'm afraid to run out of things to talk about, or I'm afraid to look like a jackass. So I especially want to pay attention because of the fact that if I lose track of what's happening in the plot, it both hurts my enjoyment and my ability to talk about the game, and makes me look like a jackass in front of a bunch of people that will call me out on it. They'll call me out on things no matter what happens, but still. And by the way, there's nothing especially terrifying like when you read a paragraph of text and realize that somehow, for reasons you can't articulate, your brain managed to wander. So even though you said the entire paragraph out loud to your audience, you somehow didn't actually internalize any of it and don't remember reading it. That's happened a couple times where I'm like, oh fuck, how'd that even happen? But brains are weird and complicated, and the number of, like, human perception's a fucking trip, and it's so flawed and messy, and if anyone's a case study for that, it's Durf, and all the various moments where we'll all loudly proclaim instructions for something, and then repeat it, and then also call him out by name, and then repeat it again, and then after all that, Durf will be like, what's going on? And I'm like, yeah, what? Okay, how? But, I say that all the gripes I have about my job, almost none of them actually make me enjoy games less. I think the engagement level I have with games is only increasing as a result of my job, and I think that's generally an improvement. And I think, and like that part I kind of recommend. And I think somebody trying this out for the first time right about now may not have the same experience as me, because they'd be going through the stages of conditioning themselves to be able to do what I do, and that's work. But I'm past that. I'm past the practice part, and so now I kind of just do this, and I don't even. It's a weird skill because I don't even fully appreciate what I do well about my own job half the time. I don't, because a lot of it's unconscious. A lot of this general thing is just like a live performance thing that just happens, and which is why imposter syndrome is such a thing, is because people don't feel like they earned it, and they don't understand why people like them and things like that, even if people tell them to their face. Yeah, it's a whole thing. But the games themselves I generally enjoy more, and I find that because I'm trying to entertain people, I shy away from games that frankly are a waste of time. Like practices that used to waste my time for hundreds of hours, now I just don't do, because I'm like, well, that's not good for video, and so then I just won't play that game and stuff like that. There is the occasional thing where there's something that I might like to do, but I just won't have time for, and I don't want to make my audience watch it, but also I don't have the time to like deal with like grinding out that particular thing or doing some particular thing in a game, or just out of curiosity. Like sometimes you might want to just pause and read everything in the codex and read every tutorial pop up and be really sure of what's in your inventory. And on some level, And like it goes both ways, where like on one level people will be like, that Let's Player didn't notice that tutorial pop up, or man, why don't Let's Players ever read, or whatever the fuck, and mocking how stupid Let's Players are for not being aware of things. But at the same time, like, I remember when I opened up Ghost of a Tale, I made a point to read the item description of everything in my inventory to get as much information I could about my character and the context and what was happening, and that pissed people off too. I had people complaining that half the video was with just the menu open and stuff like that, because like it goes both ways, and that's one of the cases where I'm like, fuck off and let me enjoy the thing, even though this is supposed to be a show for you, is when I'm doing a thing where like I kind of want to stop and look at something. But that makes games like this extra incompatible at times, because there's so much shit to analyze and figure out about what to put on your character that is super not good for doing a Let's Play. And so if you ever wonder why a Let's Player is not doing stuff like that, like going all in their items and like min-maxing and shit like that, sometimes it's because of the fact that they're trying to make things happen in the video that they're showing you. And it's really hard, like, your brain, you have to shut down the language part of your brain practically and just stare at these things and like look at the numbers, and then that does that much DPS, and that does 15% cold resist, and that does that much, and how does that affect, and is it better to have 1 to 4 lightning damage or 2 strength added to your character? How does that calculation work out? And then you're opening a Wikipedia page and you're trying to do calculations, and like that kind of stuff starts happening. Like at some point, what it takes to play certain RPG mechanics in a game well and min-max your loot and stuff like that is literally research, like on the level of like the type you would do to write a paper. Like you have to do research to break down the mechanics of a game on a level that is incompatible with doing a live show with commentary. If you ever see a Let's Player not neglecting those kinds of stuff, if you see them neglecting that kind of stuff and don't know why, that's why. It's because you're there. And it's just part of it's one of those boundaries of the format of, it's a bit of a limitation, but also it's not as big of a deal as people make it out to be, because people just, I always think of that ProZD video, why isn't he using fire magic? Doesn't he know that this enemy's weak to fire magic? What is he doing? It's one of my favorite videos. He makes really cathartic videos to watch from a creator standpoint sometimes, where you're just like, oh, it's the exact emotion to still do a 10-second video, and I can just keep replaying it. Yeah, I think I answered the question more or less. Yeah, I don't think that playing video games is a chore, and I don't want to be misinterpreted as thinking that. Like, let's be very clear. My job, as I find it, does not make video games less fun. It makes me engage with them in a way where I actually actively think about how much I should value my time, because I'm valuing other people's time, and that is generally a net plus. And I'm doing a show where I have like an audience, so I have like an incentive to be engaged and pay more attention to things on behalf of everyone else. Like these are all net positives for enjoying an art form and stuff like that. That's all progress. The only nuance I was trying to add was just that it is still a job. You do still have like hours you have to work and commitment where you have to do the thing whether you feel like it or not, because it is a job. And you have like money strife of like, is my income sufficient to support the thing, and how is that going to work out, and levels of like, your income is not set in stone month to month like some other jobs are, so you have to also like be mindful of how any of this might change at a moment's notice, and like a bunch of other things are all very true. And the dream job mantra diminishes the reality of some of that in a way that's damaging and unrealistic and dangerous when it comes to people who aren't already doing the thing. We notice that these torches aren't evenly laid out. These ones are right against the corner, so you can't walk between the pond and the torch, but this bottom one, you can walk between the pond and the torch. Crazy. Get on that, Blizzard. Like, man, you don't even patch your games. It's only been 16 years. 18 years? Was this game 2000? It might have been 2000. That's the general thing I was trying to express. And I think it's very important. Like, you might remember that once upon a time, I think Jesse Miller and somebody else, I sat down with on a podcast, and just, it was like a how to YouTube podcast or something. I had somebody asking me for advice, and then I had another person asking me for advice in such a tight timetable that I was like, you know what? I'm just going to invite both of you onto a podcast and disillusion you for 2 hours. And it's somewhere on my YouTube channel. I don't know what it's called there, but it's easier to find in the SoundCloud feed because you can just scroll down until you find the weird podcast. Because like there's the OG Sadcast, and then there's like old videos of like the podcast with me and Wander and everyone, but there's also like there's one weird odd duck podcast that's, I think it's older than 4 Nerds, but I don't know where it is beyond that point, where it's just a one-off that's like that. And yeah, it's just me shitting on the dreams of 2 YouTubers basically. I think one of them went on to make their YouTube channel for a while and stuck it out for a bit, and then eventually called it quits, I think. And I think the other one actually never made anything. I think I actually crushed their dreams, which was not the goal, but I was just trying to be very realistic and frank with these people about what the actual realities of what this job is like and so on. And I think it's important to disillusion people a little bit and be frank about a lot of the stuff, because if you don't tell them the truth, they think that it's just like a wacky, fun adventure with no downsides and no real work, and you just start making money. And it's like, no, it is still work. It is a time investment. And one of the most crushing things about running a YouTube channel is the fact that when you're getting started, you will just you will not make progress. You're gonna make videos that get 0 views and 0 likes and 0 comments, and then you stick it out for like a year maybe, and it'll be like, oh yay, my videos get like 10 views consistently. I have like a couple hundred subscribers. Every now and then I get a comment like, oh, I get 4 comments a day. Then you start to like really like those people because they're familiar, like reoccurring people. And that's if you're, and yeah, some people go viral and break through shockingly fast, and some people don't even make it as far as I just said. And you don't really have direct control over a lot of that stuff. And that's especially true because YouTube doesn't even tell us how their own site works. And so there's all these secrets constantly coming out about, like, did you know that videos have age ratings and demographic ratings, and entire channels are rated as basically being like PG or PG-13 or R and stuff like that, and that your entire channel can have a rating that affects how your entire career is going to play out and whether or not you're promoted to certain types of demographics that are actually good for growing your channel or not, and your growth could be stunted indefinitely for reasons that you'll never understand or even be aware of. Like there's so much of that shit going on that you have to just be willing to accept that any money you invest in your YouTube channel you will never make back ever. You'll assume you'll never make a single dollar, and be pleasantly surprised if anyone even starts watching your videos, because one of the many things, as I talked before about how like the barrier for entry for making videos was reduced because of the fact that you can just locally record things instead of having super expensive hardware or pointing a camera at your screen, stuff like that. Like doing Let's Play channels or even vlogging, like consumer cameras are so good now. Like amateur filmmaking, even stuff like that, like that's way harder, has such a lower barrier to entry now because of the democratization of the internet and how it levels all playing fields and stuff like that. That means everyone can do this. Everyone can start doing this basically, which means that there's an ocean of people to be lost in. And you have to see for every successful channel you see, you have to just imagine, even though it's impossible to imagine because the number's so high, you have to imagine thousands of very similar failed channels that, and in many cases, a lot of those people could have made it just as well, and incomprehensible reasons held them back. But a lot of people also suck. I'm just gonna be honest with you. I've been on the Let's Play subreddit. I've seen so many people be like, "Woe is me! Why isn't my channel flourishing?" And I'm like, "It's because you upload one video every 3 months, and your commentary sucks, and your audio quality sucks, and nothing you're doing is actually particularly good, and you're kind of just wanting rewards for not doing anything. Sorry." People don't like it when you say that stuff. I don't say it in those terms, but they don't like hearing that there's ways they can improve. I've stopped going to the Let's Play subreddit because a lot of those people just want to be told that they're all special baby children and they're so great and they all deserve all the best.
and they're only being held back because of the algorithm, or because they're not sellouts. They're just not successful because they're not sellouts, or some other bullshit. And it's like, no, you're not successful because you don't actually try that hard and you just want to succeed. And I get that other people made it look easy, but almost everyone you know that's successful on YouTube actually had to put a lot of time in at some point, and it's not just something they fell into necessarily. Yeah. And they're like, I don't want to hear about reality. I just want to hear about how I'm only being made unsuccessful because there's something villainous in my life holding me back and stuff like that. Yeah. Oh, now I made myself sad because it reminds me of, like, a lot of narratives about people getting mad about, like, some minority group infringing upon their sphere, and that must be the reason why they're not living the dream that their parents lived or something, is because somebody else must be taking it from them. And that's the source of a lot of actual strife and anger between different groups in real life. And this isn't fun video game talky anymore, but it's literally the same thought process as blaming external forces for all of your problems and then projecting said anger onto other people and stuff like that is like a real problem that people should be self-aware of, or it will only make their life and society worse. Hooray! So that's apparently where I ended the subject on when somebody asked me about what it's like to play video games for a living. Anyway, we got through 4 questions today. That's like a world record. Ta-da! Send in more questions via my inbox on Patreon. In case it's not clear, I want to reach out to some of you guys here. Do not email me them, or do not respond to the notification on Patreon. I haven't really gotten confirmation that anyone does this. I'm just paranoid in the background that it might be happening, because if it was happening, I would have no way of knowing. If Patreon emails you something, do not respond to that email, because that's just a bot that's telling you about a notification on this website. So if you respond to that with your email, it will not be read by me or Patreon. It'll just go to the void and be lost forever. You very much need to go to my Patreon page and send me a message. Or alternatively, if really necessary, you could also find, like, the podcast emails or my public email on my YouTube channel, but it's really preferable if you keep them where they're supposed to be, which is my inbox. But, you know, there's places and whatnot. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Like always, send in your questions. Hope you don't mind that half this video is me running in circles, but that room has a lot of loot I need to sort, and my inventory is full. And I should probably deal with that instead of just running away from it. Yay! See you next time. Try not to be sad.